Let's talk about social inequality in Taiwan. It's a topic that, feels really personal to so many of us. You see it in the rising cost of living, you feel it when it seems like the ladder to success has a few rungs missing. Today, we're going to dive deep into an analysis that really unpacks this whole complex issue, looking at how money, opportunity, and even our own identity are all tangled up together. So, let's get right into it. Okay, let's start with a number, 6.15. Now, according to government data from 2022, this is the income gap between the wealthiest 20% and the poorest 20% of households in Taiwan. And look, while that number is already pretty high, it's really only telling us part of the story, the part about income. The real divide, the one that's driven by wealth, is actually much, much wider. So how do we even begin to understand this? Well, we're going to borrow a really powerful idea from sociologist Scott Cerno, the Gordian knot. You might know the legend, this ancient, impossible to untie knot. It's a perfect metaphor, because modern inequality isn't just one single problem. It's this complex, messy tangle of class, gender, and ethnicity. You just can't understand one without seeing how it's all connected to the others. So here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to try and unravel this knot one strand at a time. We'll look at the money knot of wealth, then the opportunity knot in our education system. After that, the identity knot of who gets left behind, and the space knot of housing. And then, at the very end, we're going to ask the biggest question of all. Can this knot even be cut?
First up, the money knot. This is probably the one we all think of first, the gap between the rich and the poor. But have you ever wondered why it feels like this gap isn't just big, but it's actively getting wider every single year? Well, the answer really lies in a simple but absolutely crucial distinction.
And it all comes down to the difference between income and wealth. See, income is what you earn. It's your salary, it's a flow of cash coming in. But wealth is what you own. We're talking assets like property, stocks, investments. It's a stock of value that you have. And believe me, in the story of inequality, wealth is the main character. Just take a look at these numbers from 2022. Income from wages, from actually working, grew by about 2%. Okay. But income from assets, things like rent and investments, that grew by 4.0%. That is literally double the speed. This is the engine right here. Money is making money much faster than people are making money from their jobs. And that's exactly why the wealth gap is accelerating. And what does all of this lead to? Well, it leads to a truly staggering concentration of wealth. Reports show that in Taiwan, the top 10% of the population now holds 61% of all the wealth in the country. Now get this, the entire bottom half of the population, that's 50% of people, they own just 4%. That right there is the money knot in a single powerful image. Now, that huge concentration of wealth doesn't just sit in a bank account, right? It goes on to shape the next generation. And that brings us to the second tangle, the opportunity knot. We've always been told that education is the great equalizer. It's the clearest path to moving up in the world. But is that really what's happening in Taiwan today? Or could our education system maybe be accidentally helping to lock these class structures in place?
I mean, on the surface, everything looks great, right? Taiwan has one of the highest rates of university attendance in the entire world. It really seems like the doors to higher education are wide open for everyone. The common idea is that, hey, if you just work hard enough, you can get a degree.
But the research paints a much more complicated picture. It suggests that the real inequality in education doesn't end when you get your acceptance letter. In a lot of ways, that's where it truly begins. There's this concept in sociology called horizontal differentiation, and it is so important here. Here's the idea. While, almost everyone can go to university, the type of university you go to creates a totally different life path. Research shows that students from wealthier families are way more likely to end up at elite public universities, the ones that get massive government funding and have lower tuition. Meanwhile, students from lower-income families, they tend to be concentrated in private and vocational colleges, which often have higher tuition, fewer resources, and unfortunately weaker job prospects down the line. So two students can get a degree, but their future careers can look completely different just based on where they went to school. So here's the bottom line. Instead of being that ladder up, the education system can end up acting more like what Cerno calls a gatekeeper. It starts filtering people not just on their grades, but on advantages they already have. Things like cultural capital. Just knowing how to play the game of the complex application system, and social networks become just as critical as academic merit. And this is how inequality gets passed down from one generation to the next. And this idea of gatekeeping leads us right into our third tangle, the identity knot. Because these economic and educational divides, they don't just happen in a vacuum. They are deeply, deeply woven together with our identities, specifically with gender and ethnicity. Who you are can have a profound impact on your economic destiny.
Let's start with gender. 15.8%. That was Taiwan's gender pay gap in 2021. And what's really worrying is that it actually got worse after the pandemic. To put that in real terms, it means a woman would have to work an extra 58 days, that's almost 2 full months, just to earn the same annual salary as a man doing similar work.
But honestly, that pay gap, it's just what you see on the surface. The analysis points to something much deeper, called hidden female poverty. See, because a lot of stats are collected by household, they can totally mask the financial vulnerability of women, especially those who may have left the workforce to raise a family. This hidden poverty becomes devastatingly real if there's a divorce or if a spouse passes away, and it leaves many older women with almost no retirement security to fall back on.
And you see the same kind of pattern when we look at ethnicity, and it's really stark. Taiwan's indigenous peoples actually have a higher labor participation rate than the general population, but that number hides a really harsh reality. They are overwhelmingly concentrated in what economists call a secondary labor market. Think high-risk, low-stability, physically brutal jobs in sectors like construction. And the result? Much lower average salaries and a much greater toll on their health and their well-being.
All right, let's move on to the knot that for so many people is the most stressful one of all, the space knot. Yeah, we're talking about housing. The dream of just owning a home in Taiwan has become this source of incredible anxiety and a powerful, powerful engine of inequality.
And this isn't just about you or me struggling to find a place. This crisis has huge ripple effects across all of Taiwanese society. Research from Taiwan's central bank and academics shows that these sky-high housing prices stifle innovation, because why would you invest in a risky new business when you can just pour money into real estate? They're also directly linked to Taiwan's declining birth rate, and, maybe most importantly, they create a massive wealth gap between generations.
So how does this happen? Well, there's a powerful mechanism at play called the collateral channel. It's pretty simple, actually. If you already own property, you can use it as collateral to borrow more money. What do you do with that money? You buy more property, and you consolidate your advantage. But for younger people who don't have wealthy parents to help with a down payment, that door to building wealth is basically locked shut. It's a system that just reinforces advantage over and over from one generation to the next.
So, we've walked through how the knots of money, opportunity, identity, and space are all tangled up. It creates a system that can feel totally impossible to escape. And this brings us to that final, really crucial question. We've looked at the problem from all these different angles, but can we actually cut the knot?
Well, the analysis we've been looking at says yes, it's possible, but it's not going to be easy. It's going to take some really bold structural changes. First, tax reform that focuses way more on wealth and on capital gains, not just on income. Second, education reform that gives equitable funding to all universities, not just the elite ones. Third, housing policies that get serious about curbing speculation and actually prioritize affordability. And finally, stronger laws to really fight discrimination based on gender and ethnicity.
And all of this leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. Surnow reminds us that inequality isn't some law of nature, like gravity. It's the result of choices. The policies we decide to enact, the systems we build, and the values we choose to prioritize. So the real question for all of us is, what choices are we going to make next?